at all innovations as including scientific input, experience-based input, and something involving a focus on users and employees. I think that's the right way to see it. Of course, in practice, there might be a little different role playing here. Somebody talked earlier about the computer games. And it's well known that some very professional users of computer games are directly involved in the innovation process. They're actually engaged by the companies to do part of the development. But this is on a marginal, I would say, a marginal importance as compared to the role of users in all kinds of innovation. And the same you can say, of course, there are certain innovations which are initiated by employees. But even so, they need at some time to be designed and produced, and they even need to relate to some users at some later point. So I don't like this distinction. And I think it's an expression that you had too much focus on science earlier. In order to correct this, you try to bring these new concepts in there. So the message I have to you is that there's been a drift away from the original concept of national innovation system, which has made it too narrow. It links innovation mainly to science-based learning, and it neglects what I call experience-based learning. DUI does not stand for driving under influence. You know the American thing where you can get into jail and everything. It stands for learning by doing, learning by using, and learning by interacting. This is what DUI stands for. Strong science with weak innovation is not a paradox. There's been a lot of talk about the European paradox, because you say, oh, we are so good in science. That might not be true, by the way. But we say we are very good in science. We are not so good in innovation. This is no paradox. It reflects a too narrow definition of an understanding of the innovation process, because there can be many other things which are absolutely much more important for performance in this way. And this means that I will at the end call for a broader innovation policy strategy for Europe. Somebody asked before, how can we get different parts of the Commission to work together? I think this is a fundamental issue as well as at the national and regional level, etc. And finally, I will raise the question that you might answer if there is a bias among innovations journalists who are more interested in science-based innovation in high-tech areas rather than the more daily kind of innovation processes, which might be even more important for overall economic performance. This is the program. I already mentioned this. Paradox systems with a lot of good domestic science, but less successful in innovation. Actually, there's been an OECD report which tends to show that this is not just a problem in Europe. It's a problem in many, many different countries, that some of those which are very strong in science are not very strong in innovation. And that has to do with the fact that there is a bias towards focus on science-based learning rather than experience-based learning. And there are two reasons for this. One is that it's much easier to measure science-based learning. We can measure R&D, we can measure patents which are based on science often, etc. We have great difficulty to measure organizational learning and networking and developing of human creativity and things like that. And there is a kind of very bad rule in politics that what you cannot measure does not matter. Of course, this is completely wrong. And the other thing is that it might be more difficult to define policies which are not controversial when it comes to DUI learning. It's easier. I mean, everybody loves to have tax rebates on R&D. I mean, this is not. So I would argue that we've been through a double change of context. First of all, of course, information technology, extremely important. And it means that much more of what's going on takes place in a kind of codified knowledge in terms of information, etc. And the other thing is that the science base has become much more important, not only for so-called high-tech areas, but for all industries or all activities, including services, etc. And this calls for a strengthening of what I call the SDI mode of learning. We need, in business, we need a capacity to interact with science and to use science, increasingly in more and more parts of the business sector. But these changes, together with globalization, they tend to accelerate the rate of change, and they require, therefore, learning organizations. They require people who are competent to learn new things. They need organizations where we don't have this situation at Nokia that the marketing people and the R&D people don't talk together. This is really a bad thing. Eh? So this calls for a strengthening of the DUI mode. So it's a kind of say, one does not become more important than the other. Both become more important. So I'm going to illustrate very quickly, because I don't have much time, some results from some work I did with Edward Lawrence was the guy I mentioned before. We do the work on creative work now. Jensen and Jonsson are from Denmark, Aalborg, and it's a paper from 2007. We used data from 700 Danish firms, and we made a kind of cluster analysis where we tried to find out firms which are very strong in the SDI mode. They typically have R&D departments, they interact with universities, and they have employees with a scientific background. And we have also some which are very strong in the DUI mode. They have a strong interaction with their customers, and they have a kind of learning organization. And then we find some which were strong in both, and some which were weak in both. And then we try to see how does that affect the capacity to innovate. And the indicator we use is product innovation, the frequency of product innovation in these different types of firms. And these are, I don't think, we didn't copy the warehouse. You will get them later. But these are the characteristics we use for DUI, having to do with learning organization and closer relation to customers. And these are the indicators for the SDI learning. If they have a positive expenditure on D, personnel with academic degree, if they interact with universities. And here are the results. And you should observe that here we have controlled for sector, we have control for the size of the firm, and even for the ownership. Is it a Danish family firm, or is it part of a group, or is it part of an international group? And many of these factors, of course, have a significant impact on the innovativeness. But we have taken this into account, and what we get left here are results after we take this into account. And what it means that we use the low learning cluster as a kind of benchmark. We use the low learning cluster as a benchmark, and it means that if you have a firm with a strong DUI mode, the probability that this firm will develop a new product is about double as high as if you are in a weak learning situation. And the same is true if you have a strong SDI mode but no strength in the DUI mode. Again, the probability that you get a new product developed over a period of 3 years is double as high. But when you combine the two, you find that the probability